Step through the gilded doors and the spell shatters fast. Candles blaze, jewels whisper, silk sighs. And then the stench hits, syrupy perfume wrestling something sour, raw, unmistakably human. The fairy tale snaps. This wasn't a Disney court. It was a world where crowns glittered over unwashed scalps and power moved through halls that reeked of sweat, powder, and rot. Queens made policy while their skin burned beneath poisonous cosmetics. Ladies curtsied with gowns that hid accidents no one spoke about. Elegance wasn't clean. It was a costume. Today, we're lifting the velvet curtain on the 9 worst hygiene practices of royal women, from lethal beauty routines to palaces that doubled as cesspits. It's shocking, it's gross, and once you hear it, you won't forget it. Imagine this. It's 1580, and you're a weary servant in the court of Queen Elizabeth I. The assignment you dread most arrives. It's time to prepare Her Majesty's monthly bath. Yes, you heard that right. Monthly. The woman who ruled the world's greatest empire stepped into a tub of hot water just once every 4 weeks, and even that was considered dangerously frequent by her physicians. Servants labored all night, hauling steaming buckets of water to fill her linen-lined wooden tub. But the real horror didn't come from the water. It came from what went into it. Elizabeth coated her skin daily with Venetian ceruse, a deadly lead-based face paint, never bothering to wash off yesterday's layer before applying a fresh coat. When she finally disrobed and lowered herself into the tub, her makeup mask dissolved into the water like peeling plaster from a rotting wall. White flakes of lead, layers of sweat, and weeks of grime swirled together in a soup so foul it made attendants gag. The stench, a sickening mix of metal, vinegar, and rotting skin, was almost unbearable. And yet, Elizabeth wasn't alone. Marie Antoinette of France treated her baths like social theatre. She would recline in the tub in a full linen gown, nibbling on pastries while courtiers made polite conversation, all while she sat in weeks of accumulated filth. Behind the grandeur lay a brutal truth. These queens ruled nations while battling constant itching, hair loss, and the poisonous toll of their own beauty rituals. Step closer into Elizabeth I's chambers, and the illusion of divine beauty vanishes. Her face wasn't simply pale, it was painted into a ghostly mask of death. Every morning, her ladies applied fresh Venetian ceruse, a paste of vinegar and ground white lead, directly over yesterday's cracking layer. Washing with water was considered dangerous, so the mask only grew thicker, heavier, and more toxic. The effects were devastating. Lead seeped into her skin, destroying her memory, destabilizing her moods, and rotting her teeth. Courtiers whispered of her violent temper, her forgetfulness, her paranoia, never realizing it was poison, not politics, eating her alive. Her hair fell out in clumps, forcing her to wear wigs so elaborate they caused neck pain. Her skin puckered and grayed, demanding ever more paint to hide the damage. And the smell, it was legendary, a pungent metallic tang mixed with sour vinegar and the oils of unwashed flesh. Anyone who spoke with the Queen quickly learned to stand at just the right distance, close enough to hear her commands, far enough to avoid gagging. This was no longer beauty. It was an addiction, a ritual of slow suicide performed in the name of fashion and power. The obsession with pale, flawless skin reached its deadliest form with Venetian ceruse, that infamous white lead paste. Noblewomen across Europe slathered it on daily until it formed literal layers that cracked and peeled like a painted wall. The poison seeped into their bloodstream, warping their moods, clouding their thoughts, and decaying their bodies from the inside out. Hair fell out, gums blackened, and breath turned foul. Yet still, they reached for more. Fashion demanded perfection, and perfection demanded poison. To appear divine, they endured madness, disease, and a slow death by cosmetics. Physicians warned against it, but vanity always triumphed over survival. For many queens, the mask of beauty became their death mask. With so many unwashed bodies packed into palaces like Versailles, the air became unbearable. Perfume wasn't luxury, it was survival. Women carried scented sachets pressed constantly to their noses. Gloves were soaked in oils. Even jewelry was designed with hidden compartments for waxes and resins that released fragrance with body heat. But the perfumes weren't delicate. They were overwhelming cocktails of musk, civet, and ambergris, animal secretions strong enough to gag a horse. Worse, applied over unwashed skin, they mixed with sweat, rotting teeth, and infected wounds to create odors even more nauseating than the stench they tried to mask. The palace air became a choking fog of sickness and flowers, beauty and rot, leaving visitors dizzy, nauseous, and desperate to escape. One of the strangest, most disturbing roles in a royal court was the groom of the stool, the man tasked with attending to the king's toilet. Though this sounds degrading, it was actually one of the most powerful positions at court, because the groom had the king's ear during his most private moments. But imagine the reality, kneeling behind an unwashed monarch, wiping him clean with cloths or bare hands, breathing air filled with the reek of rotting meat and infected sores, all while discussing affairs of state. Wars were declared, treaties signed, and executions ordered from the close stool. Royal dignity, it turns out, was built upon someone else's degradation. In Spain, cleanliness itself became a crime. Queen Isabella and the Inquisition declared bathing sinful, associating it with Islam and immorality. Public baths were destroyed, soap was outlawed, and even appearing too clean could get you burned alive as a heretic. Indigenous peoples of the Americas, known for their daily bathing rituals, were forced to abandon their traditions after Spanish conquest. Diseases raged through their populations, while priests declared filth a form of godliness. Across Spain and its colonies, filth became not just normal, but sacred. Countess Platen of Hanover believed bathing in milk would soothe her diseased skin. Suffering from venereal infection, her sores oozed into the liquid as she soaked. When finished, she ordered the milk given to the poor as charity. To starving peasants, this seemed like a blessing, but in reality, it was a death sentence. They drank milk infused with her disease, never realizing that her gift carried sickness instead of salvation. This grotesque mixture of generosity and cruelty reveals just how blind the nobility could be to the suffering of those beneath them. The towering hairstyles of noble women weren't just fashion, they were biological disasters. Constructed with animal fat, powders, and ornaments, they became warm, greasy ecosystems crawling with fleas, lice, and maggots. These styles often remained untouched for weeks. Servants armed with jeweled scratching sticks provided temporary relief, but the scalp infections, bald patches, and unbearable smells became lifelong companions. Yet the higher the hair, the greater the status. So women endured, even as parasites turned their heads into living nests. Finally, we arrive at the greatest hygiene disaster of them all, Versailles. The Sun King. Louis XIV gathered over 10,000 nobles, servants, and soldiers into one palace, but built almost no functioning toilets. Waste was thrown from windows, corridors reeked of urine, and excrement leaked through ceilings into kitchens and bedrooms. Even the royal children grew up playing among puddles of human waste, breathing air so foul that visitors fainted during audiences. This jewel of France, this supposed pinnacle of elegance, was in truth one of the filthiest places in Europe. Behind its gilded walls, Versailles was not a palace, it was a cesspit wrapped in gold. So the next time you picture queens in shimmering gowns and glittering crowns, remember the truth behind the glamour. These were women trapped in systems that prized appearances over health, poison over cleanliness, and suffering over dignity. They ruled nations, made history, and carried themselves with grace, all while battling lice, poisoning their bodies, and living in palaces that stank of waste. Royalty may have lived in splendor, but behind the curtains, it was a life of discomfort, disease, and unimaginable filth.